Tonight, we are examining a development that military analysts say could mark one of the most serious internal challenges to Russia's war effort since the conflict began. Reports of Russian troops walking away from their posts in growing numbers. Not isolated incidents, not rare exceptions, but a pattern that analysts argue reflects a deeper breakdown in morale, discipline, and trust between the Kremlin and its own armed forces. For months, Moscow has insisted that its military remains unified, motivated, and firmly under control. State television continues to project confidence. Official statements describe steady progress, successful operations, and unwavering loyalty. But beneath that carefully managed narrative, a different picture is emerging, one that suggests President Vladimir Putin's grip over his military machine may be weakening. This is not about a single battle lost or gained. This is about something more dangerous for an authoritarian system: erosion from within. Tonight, we'll break down what is happening, why soldiers are leaving, what analysts are saying behind closed doors, and why this trend, if it continues, could have far-reaching consequences for Russia's military, political stability, and future direction. Wars are not only fought with weapons. They are fought with belief. Belief in leadership, belief in purpose, belief that sacrifice has meaning. When that belief collapses, even the most heavily armed force can begin to unravel. Russia entered the conflict expecting a rapid campaign. Many soldiers were reportedly told they were heading into exercises. Others were promised quick rotations and generous compensation. As the war dragged on, those promises collided with reality. Months turned into years, casualties mounted, equipment shortages became harder to hide, and for many soldiers, the gap between Kremlin messaging and battlefield reality became impossible to ignore. Military analysts say what we are seeing now is not sudden, it is cumulative, a slow burn that has reached a tipping point. What walking away really means. When headlines say Russian troops are walking away, it does not always mean dramatic mass desertions captured on camera. The reality is often quieter and more damaging. Some soldiers fail to return after leave. Others deliberately injure themselves to escape redeployment. Units arrive at the front under strength. Orders are followed slowly, selectively, or not at all. In extreme cases, entire groups abandon positions when pressure mounts. According to analysts who track open-source intelligence, intercepted communications, and regional court records, cases of refusal to fight have increased steadily. Military courts inside Russia have reportedly seen a rise in prosecutions for desertion and insubordination, even as authorities attempt to keep such cases out of public view. This pattern matters because modern armies rely on cohesion. Once soldiers begin acting individually rather than collectively, command authority weakens, and that weakness spreads. Rachel Maddow, why soldiers are leaving. Analysts identify several overlapping reasons driving this trend. First, exhaustion. Many Russian troops have served repeated rotations with limited rest. Mobilized soldiers, often older and with families, face prolonged deployments under harsh conditions. Fatigue erodes discipline faster than enemy fire. Second, disillusionment. Soldiers are increasingly aware of discrepancies between official narratives and lived reality. When progress is claimed but losses continue, trust breaks down. Third, fear. Casualty rates, especially among assault units, have been severe. Soldiers see comrades killed or wounded and begin to calculate their own survival chances. When survival seems unlikely, obedience becomes negotiable. Fourth, leadership failures. Analysts report complaints about poor planning, lack of supplies, and commanders disconnected from frontline realities. In hierarchical systems, leadership credibility is everything. And finally, coercion fatigue.
The Kremlin has relied heavily on legal threats, propaganda, and punitive measures to enforce compliance. But fear works only up to a point. Beyond that, it breeds resistance rather than loyalty. The role of mobilization. Partial mobilization was intended to stabilize Russia's manpower problem. Instead, analysts argue, it accelerated morale collapse. Mobilized soldiers often lacked proper training. Many were rushed into combat with outdated equipment. Families back home watched chaotic scenes unfold: crowded draft offices, shortages of basic gear, confused logistics. This mobilization blurred the line between professional soldier and civilian. When ordinary citizens are thrust into war without preparation or clarity of purpose, resistance becomes more likely. Analysts note that armies built on conscription and coercion struggle to sustain prolonged, high-intensity warfare. Loyalty becomes transactional, and when the transaction feels unfair, people withdraw.
Putin's command structure under strain. President Putin has long maintained control through centralized authority. Loyalty flows upward, orders flow downward. This model depends on fear, rewards, and the perception of inevitability. But analysts warn that military disengagement challenges this structure directly. When soldiers refuse orders, commanders face impossible choices: enforce discipline harshly and risk rebellion, or tolerate noncompliance and risk operational failure. Reports suggest some commanders are avoiding confrontations, quietly reassigning or sidelining unreliable troops rather than punishing them. That may preserve short-term stability but weakens authority overall. In authoritarian systems, perception is power. If soldiers believe the system is cracking, more will test its limits. Information leaks and digital reality. Unlike past wars, this conflict unfolds in the age of smartphones and social media. Even with strict censorship, information leaks. Soldiers communicate with families, videos circulate, stories spread. Each account chips away at the official narrative. Analysts say the Kremlin's greatest challenge is not battlefield losses, but narrative control. When soldiers no longer believe state media, propaganda loses effectiveness. Once belief collapses, enforcement becomes the only tool left, and enforcement alone cannot sustain morale indefinitely. Rachel Maddow. Comparisons to historical precedents. History offers sobering parallels. Empires often collapse not when they lose territory, but when their armies lose faith. From the Russian Empire in World War I to the Soviet experience in Afghanistan, internal military breakdown preceded political upheaval. Analysts caution against simplistic comparisons, but patterns are hard to ignore. Prolonged war, economic strain, and eroding legitimacy form a dangerous combination. In each case, leadership attempted to tighten control. In each case, pressure accelerated collapse rather than preventing it. Economic pressure and its impact. War fatigue does not exist in isolation. It is amplified by economic stress. Sanctions, inflation, and labor shortages affect soldiers' families. Promised payments are delayed. Benefits are inconsistent. Regional disparities grow. When families struggle at home, soldiers question why they are fighting. Analysts argue that economic pressure transforms individual dissatisfaction into systemic risk. It creates a feedback loop. Military strain worsens economic strain, which further undermines military morale. The Kremlin's response. So far, the Kremlin has responded predictably: denial, repression, and narrative reinforcement. State media downplays desertion reports. New laws criminalize discrediting the armed forces. Surveillance increases. Punishments stiffen. But analysts warn that repression signals weakness as much as strength. When loyalty must be forced, it is no longer loyalty.
Attempts to silence dissent within the military may temporarily suppress symptoms, but they do not cure the underlying condition. What this means for the war. Operationally, declining morale reduces effectiveness, units hesitate, initiative disappears, defensive positions become brittle. Analysts say even small-scale disengagement can have outsized effects. One unit collapsing forces neighboring units to compensate. Pressure multiplies. This does not guarantee sudden defeat, but it does increase unpredictability, and unpredictability is dangerous for centralized command systems.
What this means for Putin personally. President Putin's authority rests on control of elites, control of media, control of force. The military is the ultimate pillar. If that pillar weakens, everything above it trembles. Analysts stress that this does not mean imminent regime collapse. Authoritarian systems can absorb significant stress, but it does mean Putin's margin for error is shrinking. Every additional soldier who walks away represents not just a manpower loss, but a symbolic one. Internal elite dynamics. Elite confidence matters. Military disengagement affects how political and economic elites assess risk. If elites believe the war is becoming unsustainable, loyalty becomes conditional, support turns cautious, silence replaces enthusiasm. Analysts note that regime stability often erodes quietly before it breaks publicly. What to watch next? Analysts suggest watching several indicators: increases in military court cases, expanded use of penal units, more aggressive